I'm Olivia Carter. I'm 36 years old, and I've built a lot of things from scratch, but nothing has pushed me as hard as starting to tell this story. You know how everyone has breaking moments in their lives? Not always big, dramatic events. Sometimes a small absence, an unseen empty chair, or an invitation that doesn't come can be the symbol of everything. My breaking moment was my brother Daniel's birthday party, or rather, not being invited to that party. These days, I am the CEO of Vantage Creative, a New York-based media and creative consulting agency. I built this company from scratch, literally from scratch. The agency's first office was a small apartment on the roof of an apartment building with a laundromat downstairs on a side street in Manhattan. We had no furniture. My desk was secondhand off Craigslist. My laptop was 3 years old, and the screen would flicker for a few minutes every morning when I turned it on. But my vision was clear. I was going to carve my own path to bring the voice of brands to the world, and I did. Today, I have more than 40 employees. My team includes both Harvard graduates and bright people who entered the industry with me. We provide consultancy to 7 big brands in the Fortune 500 list. Vantage Creative's annual turnover has reached 8 digits. These are countable achievements, the kind that are written in press releases, but there are also achievements that cannot be counted. Sleepless nights, futile phone calls, the battles of an invisible son to make himself visible. With all this unseen baggage, one Sunday morning last month, I opened my cousin Emma's Instagram story. Blue balloons, silver lettering, a lighted garden, people cutting cake, and Daniel. He was smiling, surrounded by my mom, my dad, his friends. But I wasn't there. I hung up the phone with an expressionless look on my face, trying to figure out what hurt more, not being invited or not even being surprised anymore. I guess the latter. This wasn't just a birthday party for me. That missing message was the moment when the emotions that had been silently building up inside me for years crystallized. That day I asked myself, what have I been trying to prove all these years, and to whom? This story is much more than being deprived of a cake. This story is about a woman recognizing her own worth, quietly but resolutely transforming years of suppressed anger and finally taking her place without anyone's permission. And I am ready to tell this story, because only I define who I am now. Daniel and I were exactly 4 years apart. As a child, those 4 years seemed like an abyss. While he was in one room trying to knock over glass tumblers with a baseball glove, I was in the other, admiring the perfection of my focus-drawn letters and proudly folding my storybook with its red ribbon. But the distribution of attention in our house was never fair. When Daniel accomplished something, it echoed throughout the house. When I accomplished something, it usually blended into the hum of the washing machine. Daniel didn't have to try very hard to get attention. He played baseball, I read books. He won trophies, I won essay contests. When he came home with a bronze medal, there was cake in the kitchen. When I won the English Olympiad, my father would take down the newspaper and say, "Good girl, but these competitions are not real work. You're just having fun." My mother was more diplomatic, but her interest was passive. "Girls are more mature, Olivia. Boys need more attention. You're already self-sufficient." When you're a child, that might sound wise. But as you grow up, you realize that you're self-sufficient was actually a polite way of saying, "I can't deal with you." There was a hierarchy of achievement in our house. Sports, social interaction, and external achievements were at the top. Quiet achievements, intellectual development, creative endeavors. These were just sweet details. While my mother proudly told guests about Daniel's position on the school team, I was the one in the kitchen setting out the fruit platters. When I moved on to high school, things became even clearer. Daniel was preparing to go to college, and my father would ask him every night at the dinner table what he was going to major in. The most I got was, "Are you reading those novels again?" But I had already completed my college applications and won 2 academic scholarships. I maintained a 4.0 GPA throughout high school, won 3 literary competitions and 2 math competitions. My teachers showed me as a model student, but in my family, these accomplishments were often echoed like this: That's great, Olivia, but today Daniel started the car by himself for the first time. Isn't that exciting? I know there was never any intentional malice from my father, but sometimes it's not the intentional malice that destroys you the most. It's not being noticed. Sentences that start by looking you in the eye and saying, "What you did is important too, my daughter," but linger in a child's heart like incomplete applause. And as the years go by, you try to complete the sound of that incomplete applause from within yourself. I thought this dynamic would change when I entered university. I couldn't hold back my tears when I was accepted to Columbia University with a scholarship. I was stepping into my dream major, media and communication. A week before the school opened, we went out to dinner as a family. My mom had chosen a corner table, and my dad was showing Daniel the new car magazines. After the waiter took our orders, I excitedly interjected, "My advisor called today. He suggested I take a master's course in the first semester. I'll be able to add 2 more certificates before I graduate." Mom smiled. "Well done, honey. You've always been a hard worker." "Look, Daniel, that new model has 4-wheel drive," my father said, burying himself in the menu again. When I got home that evening, I stared at the ceiling for a long time, and there was a bitterness in me that I couldn't understand. That was the first time I realized that the word success doesn't mean the same thing to everyone. For some people, success means the approval of others. But some people achieve success and then sit quietly because no one has noticed them. I was in the second group. Throughout my university years, Daniel's life was like a filtered success story on Instagram. The internship, the gym, the group of friends, the new car. Our family was watching, supporting, glorifying his every step. I, on the other hand, was always in the role of the girl who made her own way but was not understood. The lack of understanding was not only familial, but also cultural. Women's success was often passed over in silence, especially women working in technical or strategic fields. I was making a difference in areas such as media planning, brand management, and creative writing, but it was always difficult to explain these achievements. Because a woman's success, especially when it was not recognized by her own family, would only be a rising data on the graph of others. In my senior year, I became the valedictorian of my department. When my name was read on the stage at the graduation ceremony, applause filled the hall. Photos were taken and awards were given. I thought I would remember that day for the rest of my life, but my parents were late. They arrived 20 minutes after the ceremony ended. My father made his excuse frankly. "Daniel had a baseball game in the morning. It went to penalties and we didn't want to miss it." The words were stuck in my throat. They said they had come to honor me, but they were still on someone else's schedule. That evening at the celebration dinner, Daniel talked so long about his penalty from the game that my mother didn't even read the menu. That's the kind of home I grew up in. And over time, I realized that being visible is not just a physical thing. Visibility is sometimes seeing eye to eye, sometimes hearing the sentence, "I am proud of you." But I didn't hear that sentence. I didn't hear it, but I heard another voice inside me. "If you have not been seen, you should speak louder." And I decided that day that I would not stop because they would not tell me about my achievements. Just because I was invisible through their glasses did not make me worthless. I was going to build my own table, and one day I would sit at it from a place where those who had not seen me for years would have to look. I was 29 when I founded my agency. At an age when people are looking for security in their careers, I reset all my savings and comfort and walked into the unknown. Was it brave? Maybe. But what was inside me was more desperation than courage. Unable to find a place for myself, I had to create my own place. There was no such thing as the first day of the foundation. No ribbon was cut, no flowers were sent. I got up early that morning, lifted the curtain that separated the living room from my kitchen in my tiny Brooklyn apartment, pulled the second-hand IKEA table in front of the window, and turned on my computer. Vantage Creative was born that day. The name meant Creative Horizon, but there were no clients on my horizon, no extra rent in my bank account. The first months were hard. Actually, difficult is an understatement. I had never been so lonely, so tired, and yet so determined in my life. At night, I slept on the grass-green pop-up couch on the floor of my living room. During the day, I was preparing presentations, writing proposals, chasing emails. Even if people didn't pick up my phone, I would leave voicemails. After each interview, I would take notes, improve myself, and try to dress better and explain myself better after each rejection. From the outside, that period was glorified as entrepreneurship. But in reality, it was staying awake with an eye that never closed, spreading the discounted pasta from the supermarket over 3 meals, and stomach pains that increased as the rent day approached. I never took weekends off. One Sunday morning, I summoned all my courage and went to a small cafe that would become my first client. I offered to redesign their menu and manage their social media accounts. I would only make $300 a month, but I was so excited. It was as if I had signed with Coca-Cola. My parents never understood this endeavor. To them, the definition of a decent job was an office life with a pension plan, insurance, and a 9-to-5 job. To them, what I called agency was still a kind of hobby, a temporary endeavor. Every weekend when I went to have lunch with them, the same question would come up. "So, Olivia, have you ever applied to government agencies? They're still hiring. The neighbor's daughter got a lot of relief after she got in." The first time I heard it, I smiled. The second time I shook my head, and the 10th time, something inside me broke. In those days, Daniel had started working at an investment consulting firm with my father's connections. In fact, in his first month, he had his office business card printed and distributed to the family. "Strategic Portfolio Manager," it said. Everyone was very impressed, even though it wasn't clear exactly what he did. My father looked over his glasses and said, "Well done, son. We need people who can manage the economic balance." When I excused myself in the middle of dinner that evening to prepare a presentation, my mother just shook her head and said, "You work hard, but think about security." On that day, I was getting ready to meet with a new potential client. I wanted to take on the local campaign of a florist chain. I had been preparing visuals from Canva until the morning to present to them, but there was no room at that table to express my excitement. Daniel's bonds, investment portfolios, digital asset analysis. The whole table was talking about his brilliance in the business world. I sat quietly in my chair, running my fork across the plate. It was necessary to smile because otherwise it would be said, "Olivia is always nervous." Over time, I got used to it, to not belonging, to being pushed to the edge of eye contact, to having another topic brought up instead of praising my success. But getting used to is not acceptance. Sometimes getting used to it is just muting the fire inside you. Sometimes things wouldn't get done at night. My computer would shut down, the Wi-Fi would go out, my eyes would tingle. At such moments, my hand would go to the phone. A child inside me would still want to call his mother. But then my inner voice would take over. "What are you going to say anyway? That you are working? I've heard you've been working for years and nothing has changed." Those lonely organization nights taught me a lot. I learned that in order to grow a business, you need to build yourself first, that faith should be nourished not by external approval, but by internal determination. And most importantly, I learned that the most powerful way to be visible is not to make noise, but to continue to exist with patience, determination, and consistency. Sometimes people not understanding you doesn't mean you are a failure. It just means that they are not looking at your level. And I, even when I was sleeping on that couch, when I had a black eye and the loneliness was through the roof, I told myself, one day, they won't tell your story. They will tell the story of working with you. And when that day came, I would tell no more to those who would not listen to me. I was just going to walk on my own path that opened in front of me, lighting my own light. There are some days that are engraved on the heart, not on the calendar. How many birthdays you have celebrated in your life, how many holidays have passed. But then there comes a day when your world changes with just one email. For me, that day was a Wednesday morning. New York was still gray, my coffee cup was cold, my eyes darted between the clock and the screen. The dream I had been chasing for years was finally about to come to fruition. Fisher Lane, one of New York's best-known and oldest retail chains. 48 stores, operating in 12 states. We had been in talks with them for 3 months. When I received the first email, I almost thought it was fake. I hadn't been in the same sentence with big brands for so long that seeing my name next to that logo didn't seem convincing at first. I made presentations, prepared figures, rewrote, redesigned, rebooted. The lights of my agency started to burn every night until the morning. My team was small, but we were working with conviction. Every single one of us was on it, as if this was the only opportunity in life. And that morning, that subject line in my mailbox, "Congratulations, let's move forward." The email was short and sweet. Vantage Creative had been selected for a $2 million annual media deal. I stared at it for a moment, my fingers still on the keyboard. I didn't know what to do at that moment. Should I cry, laugh, or let out a scream against the silent walls of the office? All those lonely nights I had dreamed of for years. All those sleepless nights, sometimes with cold pasta. It was in that moment. I had made it. I had really made it. My first reflex was to call my parents. No matter how far away they were, at that moment the child part of me still had only one desire: to be seen. I wanted to tell them, look, this time it really happened. Maybe this time there would be no promotion of someone else before I finished my sentence. Maybe this time I could be the center of the table. I picked up the phone, dialed the number. My mom answered. "Mom, I have some news for you," I said, my breathing still fast. "I'm listening, honey." "Fisher Lane, you know, the chain stores. They're going to work with us. We signed the contract this morning. It's a $2 million campaign deal." Silence. A brief pause. Maybe a few seconds. But for me, it felt like a lifetime. "How nice, dear," he finally said, that familiar, distant warmth in his voice. "Daniel got a promotion last month, too. He's now an account director. His father was very proud of him." Something cracked inside me, in a small place with a thin ache. It was as if the weight of that contract had no gravity. For me, it was a moment that changed everything. But for them, it was just another news story. I hung up the phone. It stayed in my hand for a few seconds. I had a smile plastered on my face, but I was empty inside. I went back to my desk. The email was still open on the screen. It said, "Congratulations." But strangely, it was the first time I felt so empty inside that word. That evening, I didn't pop champagne or go out. I bought a plain frozen pizza from a supermarket. I went back to my apartment. While the pizza was cooking, I poured myself a glass of red wine and leaned against the kitchen counter. I was alone. That's when I thought, if one can celebrate a victory alone, has one really won? My family's silence turned into noise inside me. For years they had ignored my small achievements. Now they had trivialized the big one. And I now understood that this was not a misunderstanding, but part of a pattern. For them, every one of Daniel's steps was precious because he was born into expectations. For me, I had made my own path, but I was left out of it. That night I left half my pizza unfinished. I sipped the wine, but it had no flavor. I browsed Netflix. Nothing interested me. I listened to the silence. I listened to what success looks like when it is silent. At one point, I looked up and looked at myself in the mirror. I said to myself, if the place where you seek approval doesn't know you, it's impossible to get approval. And that night, I made another decision. I was no longer going to live my successes for their attention. I was going to live for myself, for my dreams, for the hope in the eyes of the child Olivia. I spent that night alone, but perhaps for the first time in my life, I was with myself. Some disappointments come so quietly that one cannot understand them at first. Only a silence falls over you. Your ears don't ring, you don't even have tears. But inside you feel cold. That Sunday morning, I took my coffee and sat down at my computer, still in my pajamas, reviewing my notes for the next presentation. It was a routine morning. Light jazz music was playing in the background. The sunlight in my room was leaving a dim peace. At some point, my hand went to Instagram. Maybe I thought I would take a short break. Little did I know that I would see something there that day that I never expected. It was my cousin Emma's story. "Happy birthday, Daniel," it said, with a cake next to it and a decorated hall behind it. My eyes froze. I held my finger on the screen, watched it again. There was my mom at the table, my father, Aunt Grace, my uncle, their children, and Daniel. He was laughing, a new jacket over his shoulder, a glass of wine in his hand. Even a few of his office mates were there. There was a crowd. They were celebrating. They were cheerful. But there was one person missing. I am. Not just in the photo, life. It gave me a special pain because even as a child, birthdays were a big deal in our house. My mother always made the cake herself. My father hid the presents in the back of the closet. Daniel would shout for joy as soon as he woke up in the morning. When my birthday came, little things were done, but Daniel's was always an event. It was always like that. But I always thought to myself, when I grow up, this inequality will go away. And now I was 36, I was successful, I was independent, I had a company, and I still wasn't even included at the birthday table. I kept scrolling, and Emma had posted other videos. The moment Daniel was surprised, the songs, laughter. And I was still in front of the screen, the unseen, unheard, forgotten sister. At first I couldn't describe my feelings. I didn't know exactly what I was feeling. It was like something inside me froze. It was as if someone had left a block of ice inside me, melting silently. I didn't call, I didn't text, I didn't ask, because I already knew the answer. They forgot. Or worse, they didn't invite me specifically. Sometimes not being invited doesn't feel like being forgotten. The smell of conscious exclusion is different, heavier, more caustic. When I lay in bed that night, I watched the ceiling for a long time. One sentence kept running through my mind, quiet but clear. For years, I have been trying to prove success to the wrong people. All my life, there was a shadow in everything I did. That shadow was the desire to hear a word of appreciation from them, for them to see me, to accept me, to say, "You're there too." I was always after that. Why was my mother always the first person I looked to for every success? Why was my father's approval still stirring in me with a childlike hope? Why did Daniel's presence always cast a shadow over my existence? The answer was revealed that night, because I had always sought my worth in the wrong mirrors. I had tried to break myself, to sculpt myself into a statue of approval, but no matter what I did, my place in their eyes did not change. That night I didn't decide, but a spark lit. Maybe revolutions don't come right away, but that first spark, that inner whisper, is the harbinger of change. "It's over," said a voice inside me. "Enough." I don't want to say I decided right then. No, I didn't. I wasn't brave enough to decide yet. But that night, for the first time, I empathized with myself. I thought of little Olivia, the child who couldn't fit those thick books in her bag, who wrote stories in the back of her sketchbook, who read them to her mother and got the reply, "It's pretty, but a bit long." Someone should have hugged her. Someone should have whispered in her ear, "You are not missing. You don't disappear just because they can't see you." That night, for the first time, I sat next to that boy. I chose not to wait for him, but to stand beside him. I wasn't invited to Daniel's birthday party, but maybe that was the first time in my life that I was called to the right place, to the side of myself. And that day, there was a quiet beginning inside me. No one noticed it yet, but I did. Life sometimes plays interesting games. Just when you think, everything is clear to me now, the universe makes a move and drags you to another corner of the chessboard. That week, when I wasn't invited to Daniel's birthday party, I felt both resentment and a quiet awakening. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to explain anything. I had simply found a balance within myself. I had stopped trying to be seen. I had raised my inner voice a little louder. And just when I was in that mood, my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number. I hesitated for a few seconds, but I picked up. "Hello, I'm calling on behalf of Carter Group. We were looking for a campaign agency for our new brand Edgeline. Your presentation to the open brief call was quite remarkable. We would like to inform you that we have selected you after evaluation." I froze. The Carter Group. The company with my last name. My family's prestigious throne, which my father had run for half a century. Daniel had been a partner for the last 5 years. And I was the person behind the presentation that had caught their attention without even realizing it. At that moment, I could hear the woman's voice on the phone, but the words seemed to blur in the background. It was as if my heart had lost its rhythm. "This is no coincidence," part of me was saying. The other part of me was mumbling with a bitter smile. They didn't see a name. They didn't realize it was Olivia Carter. The pitches were sent with an open brief. Only the agency names were known. Vantage Creative. Our signature was simple but effective, so they chose it without researching who the face in the background was. And you know what was ironic, partner? My parents' company, who had thought for years that I wasn't good enough, had chosen me as the best job without linking me to their name. The voice on the other end of the phone was still talking. Some members of the board were particularly impressed with the language and strategic analysis of the campaign. They especially liked the emphasis on making the invisible visible in your final slide. Ah, that slide. It was prepared that night when I was not invited to Daniel's birthday party, which was my breaking point. I was full of emotion when I prepared that presentation. I had designed a campaign that was real, sincere, and not trying to curry favor with anyone. Maybe that's why it was so sincere and effective. At the end of the call came the classic line, "Mr. Carter, you have done a great job. We would be very pleased to cooperate." I paused. Mr. Carter. For the first time, the name felt so weighty, yet so light. With a smile slowly spreading across my face, I said only this. "Of course, my pleasure." After I hung up the phone, I pulled up my chair and sat down in front of the window. Outside, the noise of New York was the same, but inside, I felt something else. This offer was not just business. This offer was the echo of a voice that hadn't been heard in years. And most importantly, this offer was not their choice. It was mine. Throughout my life, the Carter Group had always been presented as an inaccessible entity, as if it was my father's and Daniel's domain. My name was the same, but my relationship with the Carter on the sign had always remained abstract. And now, I was asked to be this voice in the creative world for a new brand that represented the future of the company. The next day, I got an email for a contract meeting. They wanted to meet face-to-face. The meeting address was the Carter Group's head office, that soaring glass tower in Midtown Manhattan, the 27th floor, where my father had his desk. I had only been in that building once before, when I was 22, in my senior year of college, to ask for an internship. My father didn't even greet me that day. His assistant said he was busy and handed me a blank resume form. I never went back there after that day, but now it was different. I was no longer coming to ask for an internship, but to bring a project. And this time, I wasn't asking for it, they were asking for me. I came together with my teammates for preparation. We revised the presentation, clarified the plan, but there was a different excitement inside me. This was not just a corporate meeting. It was like the girl who hadn't been seen for years knocking on the door and walking in. But this time her head is not down, her shoulders are straight, her files in her hands, and with her story. On the day of the meeting, I thought a lot about what to wear. Should I wear the black suit or something simpler? In the end, I chose a navy blue dress, simple but elegant. No jewelry, just a red lipstick. Because I was no longer getting ready for attention, I was getting ready for me. When the elevator reached the 27th floor, I looked at myself in the mirror. I looked at that young woman who was once denied entry and sent back with an internship form. And only one sentence passed through me. "You're ready." When I entered the Carter Group's headquarters, my every step echoed. That glass tower in Midtown Manhattan has been a symbol for me since I was a kid. Shiny like my father's tie, as unattainable as Daniel's future plans, the place my mother said, "It's too corporate for you." And this time, my visitor's pass read, Agency CEO. The secretary who greeted me in the lobby was friendly but unfamiliar. She showed no surprise at the name Olivia Carter, so they still hadn't realized who I was. The thought was both amusing and tragic. If people with the same last name remembered you when things were going badly, it was only natural that they would forget your name when things were going well. I was directed to the meeting room. There was a manager sitting at the head of the table, contract files in his hand, computer open, eyes tired. He smiled when he saw me. "Welcome. Olivia, right? Vantage Creative's Director of Client Relations?" "No," I said. "I'm the founder. I'm also the CEO." The man's eyes paused for a moment. "It's you?" That sentence, so simple, yet so loaded. The expression on his face at that moment was not just surprise. There was a bit of right to be surprised in it. It was as if he wanted to say, "Did you make such an impressive presentation?" I just nodded my head. Yes, it was me. It was me. My father hadn't entered the room yet. I felt like I was counting the minutes. There was a strange tension inside me. Olivia the child was shaking, and Olivia of today was standing tall. The last time I had been in this building, I was 22 years old, a college senior, denied an internship, made to wait at security for a long time, and then sent back without being interviewed. Today, I was in the same building to sign a $2 million contract. The door opened. My father walked in. Gray suit, his usual confident expression on his face. His eyes scanning the room, they lingered on me. 1 second, maybe 2, but time seemed to stop. Surprise quickly gave way to a mixed feeling. "Olivia?" Her voice was slightly shaky. "You're the one who ran this?" I held my head high. "Yes, Dad. I'm the founder and director of Vantage Creative." At that moment, I didn't expect pride on his face, but maybe a recognition, an acceptance. What I saw instead was discomfort. His eyes widened for a moment. Maybe he was thinking to himself, "How did this happen? To them, I wasn't supposed to have come here. I was supposed to stay outside the borders, and now I was at the center of one of their most important projects." There was a brief silence in the meeting room. Then my father seemed to pull himself together. "Well, good work." His tone was neutral, neither hot nor cold, but it was not the voice of a father, but of a professional manager. The manager interjected, "Mr. Carter, the presentation was really impressive, especially the depth of the target audience analysis and the insights into the future of the brand." "Yes," I said. "I wrote those analyses." My father gave me a brief look. "Are there any other partners in Vantage Creative?" "No," I said. "I'm the sole founder. I'm the sole owner." My words moved slowly around the room. I had nothing to hide anymore. This was my rightful place, and they now had to do business with the person they had chosen to ignore in the past. I felt a strange peace in that moment. Not revenge, not contempt at all. It was just the cold but clear face of reality. I had entered the room not as the person I was not supposed to be, but as the person I was supposed to be seen as. As the meeting continued, I noticed my father's silence. He was taking notes from time to time, sometimes giving me brief glances, but there was still that old definition in his eyes. We didn't expect this. At the end of the meeting, the manager turned to me and said, "We are having the contract drawn up. We will invite you to sign next week," he said. I nodded. "It will be exciting for us to work with you too." My father just bowed his head. This time he made no comment. On the way out, I looked at myself in the mirror. The Olivia of years ago was there, but her shoulders were no longer slumped. She was a woman walking not only to success, but to her own worth. And I was no longer in the background of this story. I was the lead, not by choice, by deserving it. When the day for the contract meeting arrived, I was filled with a mixture I couldn't describe, a confident calmness and an ache from childhood traumas. I was alone in the elevator as I went from the entrance of the building to the 27th floor. I looked at my reflection in the mirror and thought only this sentence. Today not only papers will be signed, Today, years of ignorance will also be sealed. The meeting room was spacious. The walls were covered with wood paneling, and a long table sat in the center. Through the window, the crowds of Midtown looked tiny. 4 chairs were ready at the table. I sat in one, the Carter Group's marketing director in the other, a polite, measured man who never avoided eye contact. Daniel came next. He sat quietly. We locked eyes, I smiled, and he just bowed his head in his customary silence. And finally my father entered the room. A file in his hand, an old suspicion in his eyes. As always, he was running the meeting. He was in power. He thought so. The marketing director opened the file. Edgeline Global Launch, PR and Media Strategy Agreement was written on it. The contract covered a total budget of $5 million. These were not $500,000 plans. This was a deal that would shape the destiny of a brand. I took the documents in front of me. I already knew all the details, but I checked it anyway. Vantage Creative's name was mentioned on every page among the sentences written in legal language. At that moment, seeing my name on such an official document on a table this big gave me a strange sense of pride. My father turned the papers over slowly. The movement of his hands was controlled, but his gaze was different. It was as if he was still trying to figure out whether this was real or not. And finally he spoke. "Are you sure you can handle this?" The sentence seemed so simple, but underneath it was decades of disdain, insecurity, and pent-up anger. This question reminded me of the first day my agency was founded. The night I sat alone at the kitchen table with zero budget, the weeks of sleeplessness as I prepared the presentations, the days I traveled between 3 cities to win a client. And now, right there in front of me, I looked into the eyes of the man who asked me, "Are you sure?" The young Olivia in me wanted to scream. "Would I be sitting at the same table with you if I wasn't sure? Now you're validating the success you've refused to see for years." But I didn't say any of that. I just looked into her eyes, using the power of silence. Then I answered slowly. "If I wasn't sure, I wouldn't be sitting here." At that moment, the atmosphere in the room changed. My father closed the file. He put his hands on the table. His eyes shifted to Daniel, then back to me. But this time he said nothing. It was as if his mind was calculating inside himself. When did this girl become so powerful? How could I treat someone who leads so many people as a mere hobbyist for so many years? But he wasn't asking me these questions. He was asking himself. Daniel was still silent. He looked at the files on the desk. He didn't speak. He was always like that. He didn't defend me. He didn't confront me. He was in limbo. Maybe he was afraid. Maybe he didn't want to go outside the circle drawn by his family. But I had no expectations for him anymore. She was a side character in my story. I was in the center. The marketing director interjected as if to clear the air. The presentations were very impressive, especially the campaign visuals, and the launch plan were spot on. This collaboration will be truly transformative for Edgeline. I nodded. Our team worked day and night on this. We will do everything we can to make sure that not only Edgeline, but also the brand's vision gets the visibility it deserves. At that moment, I picked up the pen on the desk and turned to the last page of the contract. My name was on the signature line. Olivia Carter, founder and CEO, Vantage Creative. I raised the pen, without hesitation. I signed my signature. It wasn't just a legal act, it was a seal, a period at the end of all the years of self-deprecation, and the beginning of a new paragraph. My father said nothing. Odosia closed. The meeting was over. But I knew. That day at that table, not only a contract was ratified, but also years of silent struggle. And from that moment on, no one could see me as their little girl anymore. We were sitting at the same table, again. The weekly family dinner was a tradition the Carters had kept for years. Big dining table, crystal chandelier, silverware. Everything was in its place. But what was missing was the same as it had been for years, being seen. There were 11 of us at the table that evening, my father, my mother, Daniel, my cousins, their wives and children. Laughter, plates clinking, forks dancing with crystal. But nothing was in rhythm with me. Just a few days earlier, A $5 million campaign with the Carter Group had been announced to the press. It had made headlines in the New York Times, Adweek, and some financial sites. Vantage Creative becomes media partner for Carter Group's new global brand. For a PR agency, this was not just a big deal, it was a career-defining moment. But at that table, all anyone talked about was Daniel's new company car. Did you see how nice Daniel's car was? It even has a glass roof. It's a new model, the first one to come to America this year. Did the company buy it, or did you choose it? Daniel nodded with a slight smile. The company recommended it. I just picked the color. The table laughed. Champagne glasses were clinked. At that moment, I almost couldn't swallow the piece of salmon I had just put in my mouth. In the same week that I made headlines on news websites, only one car was being praised at the table of my family with the same surname. Just then, my mother turned her head slightly and looked at me. "Of course things seem to be going well for you too. Good, good." Her expression was not cheerful, not sincere. It was a kind of mission statement, an automatic reaction that said, "You're here. I haven't forgotten you either." I smiled. It had already become a habit. For years I wore that smile on my face, when I swallowed, when I was proud, when I was ignored. But that night was different. It was as if, for the first time, that shadow had become too narrow for me. It was as if I was suffocating in that back chair where I was constantly making myself smaller and smaller. At the end of the meal, while everyone went to the living room to drink coffee, I escaped to the kitchen. I stood in front of the sliding glass door leading to the garden. As I looked out into the darkness of the night, a voice I couldn't suppress rose up inside me. What more do I have to do? I had collaborated with one of the most prestigious brands in the world. My agency was growing every year. My teams were becoming more professional. But I was still not worth talking about at this table, not even as much as Daniel's choice of car. When I got home that night, the cab was silent. The driver hadn't even turned on the radio. I looked out the window. The lights of New York were always the same, but the city inside me had been destroyed. I opened my door, entered my apartment, and stood in front of the window without even taking off my shoes. I leaned my head against the glass. The coldness of my forehead contrasted with the boiling emotions inside me. The contraction spreading from my back to my shoulder, that familiar but now unbearable feeling, to be invisible. And at that moment, a sentence echoed inside me, no longer my inner voice. It was the voice of the woman who decided, who acted. Enough is enough. Nothing was broken in me that night. What was broken was replaced by something else, a sharp, clear, forward-looking determination. I no longer needed my mother's half-hearted sentences. No longer would I carry the weight of accomplishments that my father never even glanced at with approval. I would no longer worry about not being talked about even as much as Daniel's choice of car, because I had already built my own value in my silence. But now it was time to tell my story, not someone else's. It was time to get up from that back chair, shake off that invisibility, and create a reality where they would have to turn their faces to me. The next morning, I went to the office early. The sun was just rising, its glare filtering through the glass facades and hitting the projects on my desk. No one was in the office yet. There was silence, but this time it was not a silence that exhausted me, but a stillness that allowed me to collect my thoughts. The sentence, "Enough is enough," that I whispered in front of the window that night was still echoing inside me. But it was no longer an inner voice. It had become a decision, and decisions demanded action. At 9 o'clock, our COO, Elena, arrived. She was punctual and organized as always. She took the file bag off her shoulder and put it on the chair. She looked at me after taking a sip of her coffee. "Your face looks different today." I smiled. "That's because it is. Today will be a different day, Elena." We went into the meeting room. It was just the two of us around the glass table. In front of me was a copy of the contract we had signed with the Carter Group. Next to it, the famous press releases. Page after page of success, but hollow satisfaction. I took a deep breath and got straight to the point. I want to suspend this contract. Elena hesitated for a moment. Her eyes widened, her lips parted, but no words came out. Then she leaned forward slightly, as if to make sure, and asked again, "Olivia, what did you say?" "I want to stop working with the Carter Group, put the project on hold." This time she heard it more clearly. She heard, but she couldn't understand. Elena was not only my COO, she was also my closest confidant. She had grown this agency with me. She was there for me through every challenge. Her strategic acumen was behind many of our successes. But this decision was about more than business, and I had to explain it to her. "Look, Elena," I said, "this campaign is big, yes. It's a brilliant reference, no question. But this is not just a job for me. It's not a decision to infiltrate a system that has ignored me for years. It's a decision to step outside that system. I'm tired of trying to get a seat at their table. I want to have my own table." Elena squinted her eyes, listening to me intently. She was silent, but her emotions were written all over her face: confusion, admiration, and a hint of worry. "So you're saying that the point you've been trying to reach for years is no longer satisfying you because it doesn't accept you as you are?" I nodded. "Exactly. They only notice me when I succeed, but never really see me. This contract is not the result of trust in me in their eyes, but of obligation. And I don't want to be the one who is forced to accept it anymore." At that moment, everything on the table seemed to lose its meaning. Numbers, logos, signatures. But what was rising in me could not be measured in numbers. Honor. And honor was non-negotiable. Elena bowed her head after a long silence. She took another sip of her coffee. Then she looked at me. "I'll be honest, Olivia. At first I was shocked because this is the biggest job we've ever taken. But seeing you like this, with such a clear and firm leader in front of me, reminded me of this. We didn't build this agency for money. We built it for our vision." I smiled. Elena's words echoed my decision. "Then," she said, closing the file slowly, "if it's time for a new desk, let's start." At that moment, everything was still the same in the world outside the office. Cars were on the road, people were drinking coffee, emails were pouring in. But inside Vantage Creative, something had changed. It was no longer just an agency, it was a stance. And this decision would be the first step, the most powerful symbol of that stance. Elena opened the digital copy of the contract. "I'm starting the legal process to officially suspend it. If you want, we can prepare a press release. We'll keep it under control." "Yes," I said, "but let's just call it a strategic change of direction in the press release. We don't need to share the reasons with anyone. I've already sent the message." In those moments, an outsider might have thought it was just a contract being canceled. But in fact, for the first time in years, I was giving myself this message: you will no longer walk in anyone's shadow. The meeting was arranged in the Carter Group's headquarters building, in a private boardroom on the top floor. It was one of the rooms where only the most critical decisions were made, where the family and the company intersected most acutely. In a black frame on the wall was a portrait of Grandpa Carter, a cigar in one hand, a balance sheet from the early years of the company in the other. Looking at that portrait, one always thought the same thing. This company was built on decisions, not emotions. When I opened the door and walked in, there was silence. 3 people at the table: my father, Daniel, and the CFO's assistant. I walked slowly to the table with the termination file in my hand. Before I sat down, I locked eyes with Daniel. There was a mixture in his gaze: anger, confusion, acceptance, perhaps for the first time. As soon as I sat down, my father got straight to the point. His voice was stern. "This is not professional, Olivia. You're throwing away years of investment, planning, prestige for a personal ego." I didn't respond for a moment. The words he used, professional, investment, prestige, were actually things that hadn't been in my story for years. because they were just words in a definition of success that revolved around them. For me, success was being able to flourish where you were suppressed. I took a deep breath. I didn't open the file. I wanted him to look me in the eye. "No," I said. "For years, you've been the one to bring the personal into the professional sphere. I just choose not to allow it anymore." There was a silence. My father looked at the file, then back at me. "For years, I've told you how many doors this company could open for you, and you've always gone in the opposite direction. Because the doors you opened led to the room you wanted. I built my own door, and now you expect me to walk into that room and sit there on your terms. I'm sorry, I'm playing by my own rules now." Daniel put his hands on the edge of the table. It was as if he wanted to speak but was afraid to form a sentence. My father turned to him quickly. "Because of you, Daniel will be left behind in the new project." His words were both accusation and defense. It was a tone that for years he had been used to blaming every failure on someone else. For the first time, I responded without feeling any anger inside. I smiled. "And because of me, maybe for the first time, he will have to accomplish something on his own." Daniel bowed his head. Silently, he closed his laptop. In that moment, something broke in his eyes for the first time. He realized that maybe he would have to take his own steps instead of walking the easy path that had been set for him for years. My father stood up. "You present this as a personal victory, but it's bad for the family and bad for our company." I stood up too. I got to eye level. "This is not a victory. This is a boundary. And that line is outside that invisible frame you've been drawing for years. I refuse to stand there. I'm defining my own space now. And if it's hurting the company, it's not me. It's the injustice of this structure." I put the file on the table. "If you sign, this is officially over. If you don't, it's over again, because I will no longer proceed on your terms." My father looked at me. For the first time, really looked at me. He didn't say a word, but the familiar shadow of pride was gone from his eyes. It was replaced by a quiet disappointment, even a little fear, because for the first time, a voice that had been suppressed for years was openly challenging their established order. And this challenge came not in a shout, but in a calm but shattering decision. Daniel stood up. Slowly, he turned to me, and quietly, for the first time, he said something. "Olivia, maybe you were right all along." There was a split second of emptiness inside me. I never expected to hear that from Daniel, but even this one sentence, coming after years of silence, was enough to shake things up. I took the pen from the table. I came to the last page of the file. I signed my name to the termination protocol, a slow, clear, and unwavering signature. Then I put the pen down. I picked up my bag, and I turned to my father for the last time. "It doesn't matter that you never believed in me, but now, whether you believe me or not, I exist, and I am no longer in the shadows." I opened the door. I left, and for the first time, I left that building with my head held high and no burden on my shoulders. When I left that building, there was a silence inside me. But it was not the suffocating silence of the old days. It was the calmness of the inner peace I had been seeking for so long. I looked up at the sky. Even in the gray sky of New York, there was a brightness that seemed blue to me that day. As I walked towards the agency, my feet felt lighter on the ground. The burden I had been carrying on my shoulders for years, the desire to be approved, the struggle to be loved, the effort to be visible, seemed to be lifted from me with the signature I left on the desk that morning. When I stepped through the glass door of the agency, Elena was the first person to greet me. We locked eyes, didn't say anything, just smiled. There was understanding, determination, and a little celebration in that smile. Elena walked towards me. "How was the meeting?" "It wasn't difficult," I said, "because now I know exactly what I'm not fighting for." I went into my office, opened my window, and a cool breeze came in. Sitting at my desk, I made myself a black coffee and turned on my computer. There were dozens of emails in my inbox, but one in particular caught my attention. Subject: Request for collaboration with Vantage Creative, One North Media. The title made me sit up. One North Media, which we've been trying to reach for years but never heard back, a giant company known for its prestige in the agency world, whose creativity has been recognized with awards. There was a time when we would send them presentation files and never receive a reply. But now they had reached us. I opened the email. Dear Mr. Carter, as One North Media, we have carefully followed Vantage Creative's recent stance. We especially watch the process with Carter Group with great respect. We want to work with brands that can draw such boundaries. We would like to set up a meeting to get to know you and discuss collaboration opportunities. As I read the email, my eyes did not fill with tears, but my heart felt heavy. Because there was more than an offer in these lines, an acceptance. And this acceptance was not coming from the table of a family that did not belong to me, but from the table of my own making. Elena knocked on my door and came in. All good? Even better, I said, and turned the screen to her. Her eyes lit up when she read the email. When you sent the first pitch to this firm, the agency was 8 people. And the second-hand desk is still in storage, I said with a laugh. The meeting was scheduled on Zoom the same day. At 3:00 p.m., One North Media's marketing director, creative lead, and brand manager were on the other end of the screen. In the first minute, the marketing director interjected, "We noticed you because of your stance with the Carter Group. Being able to draw boundaries is your most powerful marketing tool today." At that moment, the word boundary struck me, because for years I had only felt that word as an outsider. But today, I had drawn that boundary. I had defined it. And this border was no longer an obstacle. It had become a brand value. The meeting was extraordinary. We discussed strategy, exchanged creative ideas, clarified mutual goals. But most important of all was this. For the first time in a meeting, I was recognized not only for my work, but also for my attitude. After the meeting, Elena came to my room. "Finish early today if you want, Olivia." I nodded, but I didn't leave, because this time I wanted to stay in that room a little longer, to savor not only the success, but also the peace. I opened my desk drawer and took out one of my old notebooks. On the first page was written the following: "One day I will do a project that will be known by my own name, with my own name, with my own labor." Underneath I wrote today's date, and as I closed that notebook, I said silently inside, "That day has come." On Saturday morning, on a sunny but cool New York day, my phone rang. The number was familiar, but the feeling the name on the screen evoked in me was not what I was used to. It was my mom. Whenever she called, there was a tightness inside me. She was usually short. She'd just say, "How are you?" And then she'd tell me something about Daniel and hang up. But this time, before I picked up, I noticed my fingers trembling slightly. I put the phone to my ear. "Hello?" "Olivia, honey." Her voice was soft, not the usual distant tone. She went on, "Your father wants to talk to you. We're having a family dinner this Sunday. Please come." There was a change in his choice of words. He didn't say, "Can you come?" He said, "Please come." This small difference contained something I had longed to hear for years. Need. Perhaps for the first time they really wanted me to be there, but the emotional charge of this call came from years beyond. I was silent with the phone in my hand for a few seconds. My mother waited. There was a humming in between, not just the hum of the line, but the hum of the past. Finally I spoke. "Why now?" When I asked my mother the question, she paused for a moment, but then her voice got even lower. "I don't know. Maybe we realize things too late, but we realize them anyway." At that moment I realized. This was not just a family dinner invitation. This was the first time the other side had shown the white flag in a war that had been raging for years. I took a deep breath. I didn't want to go, because for years I had sat in the living room of that house, in the back chairs, in silence. But then another voice came from inside me. Sometimes the greatest victory is not to go back. It's not shutting up when you come back. "I'll come," I said. The words were clear. But then I made a small addition, perhaps for the first time putting my own conditions. "But this time I will come to the table, not just to sit, but to talk." My mother was silent for a moment when she heard these words. Then she replied, her voice trembling, "I know, Olivia. Anyway, we all need to talk a little now." The phone went dead. But that phone call was the first crack in a wall that had been built for years, and I felt a strange mixture inside me. Anger, curiosity, cautious hope. I spent that day in silence. In the evening I stopped by the office because it was the place that always made me feel most at home. I went to my desk without seeing Elena. Without turning on my computer, I just sat there. For a moment I asked myself, what do I expect from this meal? Forgiveness? No, I didn't, because it wasn't me who needed forgiveness. But maybe, just to be heard, for once, to be listened to without being silenced. And maybe, just once, not to feel like a guest at the family table. When I left the house on Sunday morning, I wore a simple white shirt I hadn't worn in years. Simple, elegant, the way my mother likes it. I didn't need to shout to express myself, I just needed to be present. Our family's house in the suburbs was still the same. The old swing in the front yard, the flowers on the porch, everything was the same. But I had changed, and I was going to walk into this house a different Olivia this time. Daniel opened the door. We locked eyes. For the first time, we looked at each other, not with hostility, but with a slightly tired but open look. "Hi," he said. "Hi," I said. The sounds of my childhood echoed through me as I walked down the hallway, but now I had learned to walk without getting stuck in those voices. Everyone had taken their places at the table, but this time the chair offered to me was not at the end of the table, wedged between the kitchen and the living room. My mother pointed to the chair directly opposite me. "Move over here. I always want you at eye level." That sentence. It was a tiny but giant bridge thrown into the silence of the years. I crossed it. I sat down. And for the first time, I sat at that table not only as a daughter, but as a woman with her own name, her own voice. The dining table in the center of the living room was perfect as always. My mother had done her best again. The tablecloth was ironed, the silverware was arranged symmetrically. On plates, roast lamb from her own recipe, with rice with vegetables. The wine glasses were slowly filling. Daniel's wife Laura whispered to the children to be quiet. But there was something else invisible in the midst of all this beautiful order. The silence of the years. And that day, the table was a place where not only food was served, but also suppressed words. For a few minutes, only the sound of cutlery was heard. Conversations hovered in the air but didn't land. My mother tried to talk about the weather. "The roses in the garden bloomed early this year," she said. Nobody really cared about the rose garden. I was there, but this time I was ready, not silent. There was no smile on my face, but there was clarity in my eyes. After taking a last sip from my wine glass, I straightened up in my chair. I turned to my father. We locked eyes. He had that distant, authoritative expression I was used to. But this time, I no longer looked at him as a little girl, but as a woman standing there with her own name. "Dad," I said. I started with just one word. The tone of that word silenced all the noise in the room. The sound of forks stopped. Even Daniel's children stopped staring. Suddenly, I felt everyone's attention on me, but this time I didn't flinch. On the contrary, I felt even more ready to speak. "I'm not just a girl," I said. My voice was neither shouting nor trembling. "I'm Olivia Carter. I'm the founder of one of the fastest-growing creative agencies in this country. I have over 40 employees, million-dollar contracts. I'm a woman who runs an independent organization that's growing every year, and I'm a woman who's forging my own path." The air in the room changed. The words came out slowly, but like a drop they reached every corner of the table. My mother bowed her head slightly. Daniel put down his spoon and stared at me. I continued, "And I realize this. I've been trying to hear my worth from you for years, but I don't need that anymore, because I see my worth every morning when I look in the mirror." I looked at my father. His face was expressionless, but there were cracks behind his eyes. I could see that he was being forced to say something to him, but his pride still chained him. That's when Daniel spoke. "Olivia." For the first time in years, he said my name so slowly and carefully. Our eyes met. The expression in his eyes was familiar, but for the first time it came with a different flavor. Shame, and perhaps a little admiration. I've always found you successful," he said. "But you never said that," I said directly. Daniel bowed his head. "Maybe because I wasn't always as strong as you." He didn't finish the sentence, but he had said enough. Mom silently put her hand on the table. Her fingers were trembling. "I have always been proud of your success," she said. She didn't dare look at me. At that moment, I felt that all these people were admitting their shortcomings for the first time. I was still sitting in the same chair, but now I was somewhere else in their eyes. I took a deep breath. My heart was not beating fast, because this was not a fight but a closure, and this closure was achieved without shouting, without silence, just by being. "This table is no longer the end of the past for me, but the end of the limit," I said. "I will no longer prove myself to anyone, because I have already done the hardest thing. I believed in myself." I didn't get up. I stayed in my seat, but a page had closed inside me, and that closed page was the first time a woman heard her own voice out loud. When I left the family home that day, there was no anger in me, no bitterness. For the first time, I was really light. It was as if the invisible burdens I had been carrying on my back for years were left on the threshold of the door. As I walked away from the garden of my childhood, everything that once made me small was now just a memory, and I was no longer a woman of those memories, but of my own decisions. When I got in the car, the city was still the same, but I was different. I didn't turn on the radio. In silence, I looked out the car window at the streets passing by. A sentence kept repeating in my head. I didn't get approval, but I don't want it anymore. All my life, I've been waiting for someone to notice me. I worked and worked to say, "Look what I did." But now I realize that the most valuable validation was the clear answer from my own inner voice. I am enough. As I approached the agency, my phone started ringing. An unknown number. Still driving with the window down, I slowed down, put on my headset, picked up. "Hello, is this Olivia Carter?" "Yes, it's me." The voice on the other end of the phone sounded confident but sincere. "This is Melissa Grant. I'm the marketing director for Everline Hotels." As soon as I heard her name, I saw their logo, their luxury hotel chain, their international campaigns. The big client that our agency had been trying to connect with for a long time, but had never been able to open the doors. "We have been following Vantage Creative for a long time, especially after you parted ways with Carter Group. You've become even more remarkable." There was a brief silence. Then he continued. "We put our people in the front row, not in the kitchen." His words resonated with me. It was as if he was not only offering me a new job, but also honoring me where I was. After all those years of sitting in the back corner of that family table, this sentence was like a ray of light. I held the phone to my ear, but couldn't say anything for a few seconds. Then slowly, the sentence came out of my lips. Great, because now I know that I deserve to be in the head corner. I took a deep breath at the end of the sentence. A business relationship was beginning, yes, but at the same time another era was closing. I had not only gained a new client, I had won myself. After hanging up the phone, I arrived in front of the agency building. I stood in front of the door and raised my head to the sky for a moment. There was a brightness even in the gray skyline of New York. I thought to myself, I left a desk today, but it wasn't the end. This was the day I started building my own desk. I opened the door to the agency. My staff was bustling inside. Elena came in when she saw me, her eyes full of curiosity. "How did it go?" she said. I smiled. "Just as it should be." With that smile, I entered the office. We had a meeting room, a table that we hadn't named yet, but where we were planning the latest campaigns. I went in. With a pen in my hand, I wrote this sentence on the board. "Set up your own table. The top corner belongs to you there." At that moment, the people in the office turned silently and looked at the writing. Then they slowly smiled. Because it wasn't just me anymore, but everyone in that room deserved to hear their own worth out loud. Olivia Carter was no longer just a success story. She was now a presence, a woman who had ceased to be invisible, who had chosen her own place, and this was just the beginning.